The night my wife's firm held their annual client dinner at the Harborview Club, I wore the same charcoal blazer I'd had for 11 years. My wife had mentioned the event twice, maybe 3 times. Always in passing, always while doing something else. Checking her phone, touching up her lipstick in the hallway mirror. I hadn't thought much of it. We'd been married 14 years. I thought I knew what nothing to worry about looked like. I was wrong. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I was 43 years old, owned a small civil engineering firm with 9 employees, drove a 7-year-old truck, and believed, genuinely believed, that my marriage was solid. Not perfect, solid. The kind of solid you stop questioning after a decade, because you've got a mortgage and a daughter who plays travel soccer and a Saturday morning routine that never changes. You stop looking at the foundation, because you assume the foundation is fine. My wife worked in commercial real estate, not selling houses, the big stuff, development deals, mixed-use projects, corporate leases worth more money than I'd see in a lifetime. She'd climbed fast in the 8 years since joining the firm, and I was proud of her. Genuinely, when she made senior associate, I took her to dinner at the nicest restaurant in our city. When she landed the Henderson portfolio account, a regional developer worth $80 million, I bought flowers and left them on her desk before she got home. I think about that now. The flowers. Our daughter was 12 that year. Smart kid, all elbows and opinions. Obsessed with marine biology and anything competitive. She and I had a Thursday night ritual. Takeout and a nature documentary, no exceptions. My wife rarely joined us. She was usually still at the office or on calls. I told myself that was just the season we were in. Building years. That's what I called them. Building years. The first thing I noticed was the phone. Not that she was on it more, she'd always been on it. It was how she held it. Face down on the kitchen counter when she used to leave its screen up. Angled away when she typed. Small adjustments, the kind a person makes without realizing it. I noticed and I filed it away, and I told myself I was being paranoid. Then there was a Wednesday, in March, when she said she had a late client meeting and didn't get home until after 11. I was already in bed. I heard her come in, heard the shower run, and I lay there in the dark, doing the math on a meeting that ran past 10:30 on a weeknight. I didn't say anything. I rolled over and closed my eyes and told myself I was tired. I was tired. That part was true. It was my daughter who accidentally broke it open the way kids do. Not with any intention, just by being observant in that unfiltered way children are before they learn to edit themselves. We were at her Saturday morning soccer game. My wife was there, which was unusual enough that I noticed. She stood a little apart from the other parents, checking her phone with that same angled posture. After the game, in the car, my daughter said, "Mom, is your friend come to the Harborview thing too?" My wife's shoulders went still. "What friend?" I asked. "The tall one, from your office. He came to pick you up last month, when Dad's truck was in the shop. I saw him from my bedroom window." There was a beat of silence, maybe 2 seconds. And then my wife said smoothly, "That was just a colleague, honey. He was giving me a ride to a site visit." I didn't look at her. I watched the road. That night, after my daughter was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold, and I thought about everything I'd filed away. The phone. The late nights. The shower at 11. The colleague who gave her a ride. I thought about it the way you think about symptoms you've been ignoring. Not with panic, but with the slow dread of someone who already knows what the diagnosis is going to be and is just waiting for the doctor to say it out loud. I didn't confront her that night. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the kind of man who acts on suspicion. I needed to know. Actually know. I called my attorney the following Monday. We worked together on a contract dispute 2 years earlier, and I trusted him. I told him what I suspected, and he gave me the name of a licensed investigator he'd used before. I called her that afternoon. Within a week, I had confirmation. It was a man from her office. A senior partner, 15 years older than her, recently separated from his own wife, the kind of man who wore custom shirts, and talked about wine the way people talk about religion. He'd been with the firm for 22 years. He was, by all accounts, very important in the circles my wife cared about. The investigator gave me photographs, time-stamped. A hotel downtown. His car in the parking garage. Twice in 3 weeks. I sat in my truck in a parking lot and looked at those photographs for a long time. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't call her. I didn't drive home and confront her. I didn't send the photographs to her firm or post them anywhere or call anyone in her family. I sat in that parking lot until I was completely calm, and then I drove to my attorney's office, and we had a 2-hour conversation about my options. I want to explain something about our finances, because it matters. When we got married, I had already inherited a small piece of property from my grandfather, about 4 acres outside the city. Nothing remarkable, but it had appreciated significantly. I'd also built up my engineering firm from scratch, starting with 2 employees and a line of credit I personally guaranteed. Before our wedding, on my attorney's advice, I had placed both the property and the business into a revocable trust in my name. My wife knew about this. There was no deception. She signed documents acknowledging it. We'd also kept our finances largely separate, joint accounts for household expenses, individual accounts for professional income. It wasn't a prenup exactly. It was just structure. I was an engineer. I liked structure. My attorney reminded me of all this. Then he explained what the next several months would look like. I listened carefully. I asked questions. I took notes. I told no one else. Not my brother, not my closest friend from college, not my daughter. I went home that evening, made dinner, helped with homework, and watched half a nature documentary before my daughter fell asleep on the couch. My wife was at another late meeting. The Harborview dinner was 3 weeks away. Here's the thing about a company dinner: when you already know what you know, every detail takes on a different weight. She mentioned she needed a new dress. I said that sounded nice. She said it was a big evening, lots of important clients. I said I was looking forward to meeting them. She paused, barely perceptibly, and then said, "Oh yes, of course." I went to my tailor and had my suit pressed. First time in 2 years. The night of the dinner we drove together. She looked beautiful. I remember that. I'm not going to pretend I didn't notice. 14 years is a long time to know someone's face, and she looked genuinely lovely in that dress. And I felt something complicated sitting next to her in the car. Something that wasn't anger and wasn't grief, exactly. More like the feeling of standing in a place you're about to leave for the last time and trying to memorize it. The Harborview Club was exactly the kind of place I'd been to a handful of times and never felt entirely comfortable in. High ceilings, low lighting, the kind of carpet that costs more per square yard than most people's monthly rent. Her colleagues were already gathered near the bar when we arrived. I shook hands. I smiled. I was courteous to everyone. Then I saw him. I'd seen the photographs, so his face wasn't a surprise. But photographs don't capture presence, and he had plenty of it. Tall, silver-haired, the particular ease of a man who spent decades being the most important person in every room he walks into. He was mid-conversation with 2 clients, and he didn't look up when we entered. Until he did. He looked at my wife first, then at me. Something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, not quite, but a kind of appraisal. Like he was measuring a variable he'd already decided was negligible. My wife did the introduction. I watched him extend his hand to me. "Good to finally meet you," he said. "Your wife is one of the most talented people in this building. You must be very proud." "I am," I said. "She's worked hard." He held my hand a beat too long. "What is it you do?" "Civil engineering, my own firm." He nodded in the way people nod when they're not particularly interested. "Infrastructure work?" "Mostly. Some private development." He turned slightly back toward the clients. Not rudely. He was too polished for rudeness, but definitively. A door closing. My wife was pulled into conversation nearby. I got a drink and found a spot near the window. The city spread out below. Lights, water, the lit spans of 2 bridges. I'd built approaches for one of those bridges. My crew had been on that project for 16 months. I stood there and looked at it and felt, for just a moment, entirely settled in myself. He found me about 40 minutes later. I think he'd been drinking steadily since before we arrived. He came to stand beside me at the window with his own glass. Stees, ostensibly admiring the view, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then, "She's good at her job, your wife?" "Yes, the kind of talent that needs the right environment to flourish, the right support." I said nothing. "It's a competitive field," he continued. "Relationships matter enormously in this business. The right connections can define a career." He paused. "Or limit one." I looked at him then, directly. He met my eyes with the confidence of a man who'd never had a conversation go a direction he didn't control. I imagine, he said more quietly now, that your line of work is fairly self-contained. Roads, bridges, functional, necessary. He swirled his glass. Different world from what she operates in. I let a moment pass. Different, yes. Must be an adjustment. Being on the periphery of it. I looked back at the window. At the bridge. I built the eastern approach to the Callaway Bridge, I said. The one on the left. 32 months of work. My firm. My team. I took a sip of my drink. My name's on the engineering certificate filed with the city. It'll be there for 60 years after I'm gone. He said nothing. I don't feel like I'm on the periphery of much, I said. He left shortly after that. I watched him cross the room and rejoin a cluster of clients, and I stood at the window a while longer and finished my drink. I didn't tell my wife what had been said. I was pleasant for the rest of the evening. I shook hands and exchanged cards and thanked the host. On the drive home, my wife said it had been a good night. I agreed. 2 days later, I met with my attorney and told him to proceed. The first indication my wife had that something was happening came not from me, but from her own bank. I'd consulted with a financial advisor before filing and made several protective moves regarding the trust. Nothing hidden, nothing illegal, just properly documented and fully defensible. Her attorney later spent considerable time trying to find fault with the trust structure and came up with nothing, because it had been set up correctly more than a decade before any of this began. I served her on a Tuesday morning. She was in the kitchen when I left for work. I said goodbye the way I always did. The process server came to her office at 10. She called me twice that afternoon. I let both calls go to voicemail and had my attorney call hers. What followed was 7 months I won't fully describe here, because it is genuinely not interesting from the outside. Attorneys and documents and mediation sessions and forensic accountants reviewing business records. What I will say is this. The trust held. The business was protected. The property was protected. The marital assets were divided. But the marital assets were far less than she or her attorney expected, because the structure I'd built over 14 years was sound. Her partner at the firm. The man from the window. The man with the custom shirts. Separated from his own wife during the same period. I don't know what became of whatever he and my wife had. It's not my story to tell. My daughter was the hardest part. I want to be honest about that. The legal proceedings, and the asset documentation, and the long hours in conference rooms. None of that came close to the difficulty of sitting across from my daughter at our kitchen table and telling her that her parents were separating. She was 12. She looked at me with those steady eyes she has. She gets them from my mother, that unnerving directness. And she said, "Did someone do something wrong?" I didn't lie to her. I told her that our family had some problems we weren't able to fix, and that both of us loved her completely, and that some things between adults were complicated. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Okay, can we still do Thursdays?" "Yes," I told her. "We can always do Thursdays." She lives primarily with me now. It was her choice, and the court respected it. My wife has her on weekends and alternating holidays. It's not what I wanted. I wanted my family to be intact, which is what I suspect most people want when they're in this situation, no matter how angry they are. But it is what it is, and my daughter and I have built something real in the space that opened up. I renovated the garage last summer. She designed the layout. She's become interested in architecture, or at least in spatial organization, and she had opinions about where the workbench should go and how the shelving should be structured. I built it her way. It's a better layout than what I would have chosen. There are things I've thought about a great deal in the months since. One of them is the conversation at the window. I've replayed it often, not with anger, not anymore, but with a kind of analytical curiosity. He thought he was delivering a message. He thought he was telling me something about the hierarchy of the world and where I stood in it. He had no idea he was talking to a man who had already met with his attorney twice, who had already moved to protect every significant asset in his life, who had already made every decision that needed to be made. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I don't say that to be dramatic about it. I say it because there's a genuine lesson underneath it. One I think about whenever I see someone get underestimated. The assumption, his assumption, was that a man who builds roads and bridges doesn't understand the kind of maneuvering that happens in glass towers, that someone without custom shirts and a corner office can be handled. The assumption was wrong. My attorney sent me a note after the settlement was finalized. It said, "Clean result. Structure held perfectly." I printed it and pinned it above my desk, not as a victory flag, more as a reminder of what proper preparation looks like. The engineering firm is doing well. We won a county contract in the spring. Drainage infrastructure, 4 townships, significant work. I have 14 employees now. We moved to a larger office space in February. On the day we signed the new lease, I brought in breakfast for the whole team, and we stood around the conference table. And I told them that this firm had survived some difficult years and was still standing, and that I was grateful for every one of them. There are good days and harder days. That's the honest answer when people ask how I'm doing. Some mornings I make coffee and drive my daughter to school, and the sun is out, and everything feels manageable. Other mornings I sit in the parking lot before I go into the office, and I think about the family I thought I had and the 14 years I spent building something I believed was real. I don't regret being the kind of man who prepares. I don't regret protecting what I built. I don't regret staying calm when every instinct told me to react. Those things served me and my daughter well. What I regret is simpler and harder to articulate. I regret not asking better questions earlier. Not as surveillance, not checking her phone or tracking her movements. Questions between two people who are supposed to be partners. The kind of questions you stop asking after a decade because you assume you already know the answers. I had a conversation recently with a man from my church who's going through something similar. He's younger than me, early 30s, kids even younger than mine. He asked me what advice I'd give. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I said, pay attention to what changes quietly. Build structures that protect what you've worked for, not out of distrust, but out of sense. The same way you'd put a seatbelt on, not because you plan to crash, but because crashes happen. And when someone tries to tell you that you don't belong in a room, ask yourself how long you've been building the things that hold the room up. He nodded, and we sat in silence for a bit. Last Thursday, my daughter and I ordered Thai food and watched a documentary about deep-sea ecosystems. She made me pause it 3 times to explain things to me. The mechanics of bioluminescence, the pressure differentials at different depths, the specific biology of a fish I'd never heard of. I told her she was going to be a marine biologist or an engineer. And she said, why not both? I said I didn't see any reason why not. The creek behind our house was running high that week from the rain. I could hear it through the window while she talked. I sat there on the couch with my kid, and I listened to her, and I thought about bridges and foundations and the specific satisfactions of building something that holds. I was grateful for exactly where I was.